Hello, everybody. My name is Scott Skiba. I'm the Executive Artistic Director for Cleveland Opera Theater, and it's my pleasure to welcome you today to Page to Stage. Today, we are going to be talking about staging on Page to Stage. So I know that Maestro Buck, Maestro Boyajan, they had discussed a couple of several different types of rehearsals and parts along the way to the process. And so, what we're going to do today is talk specifically about staging rehearsals. Now, we'll get into some of the nitty gritty of that, and hopefully, I'm trying to check here to see if technology is cooperating. Yes, okay, it's actually showing. Yay. So, what you're seeing on the screen here below me is a score for Don Giovanni. And this currently is on a program called PDF Expert. It is on an iPad Pro. I am new to using an iPad Pro. Typically, when a stage director is preparing a score, they will have a printed version. Now, every director has a different process. The process that I like to work with is represented here, where I have the score on the left-hand side of the page. Let's see if I can notate here. So the score is over here where I'm making this squiggly, and then the ground plan is here on the right. And so typically this would be in a three-ring binder. You know, there would be holes relatively here as I'm drawing those circles, and we would have a stack of paper. When you're dealing with a score like Don Giovanni, it's huge. Let's say this is the Baron Writer version, the publisher, the authoritative or text version. And so if we think it's about 500 pages, give or take, and then I add a page for a ground plan like this for each page, we end up with a stack about this thick, 1,000 pages in a three-ring binder. If you're traveling, it adds a lot of weight in your carry-on. It adds a lot of weight to and from rehearsal. And what got me thinking is that, if I'm directing about 10 productions a year, I end up with a stack 10 times this of, maybe up to 10,000 pages or so that for the most part doesn't get reused. Because let's say that, directing another production of Don Giovanni, this particular one here was for Indianapolis Opera. So shout out to all our friends over at Indianapolis Opera. And so this here, what you're seeing is, I'm going to outline here in blue, this was the set, the ground plan that we were working on. So let's say I were directing another Don Giovanni, it would have to be the same set, the same configurations, no adjustments for anything in the theater. For instance, what I mean by that is this main platform here, this may have lived in this part of the theater because it was underneath certain lights that may have been overhead here, but in another production, it might need to move downstage a few feet or move upstage several feet, or these things here might not be placed exactly where they are. Or even looking at this here, this is a front elevation. So this picture here shows you top down where all the elements are. This picture here shows you the front elevation. So we might be in a situation where we say, in Indianapolis, we have the stairs here, but we're not going to have these railings, or we're not going to have these pillars, or the pillars are moved, so on and so forth. All that is to say that the likelihood of reusing exactly what's on this page again is pretty slim. So at the end of the year, you end up with a stack of 10,000 sheets of paper that have lots of great notes and lots of interesting things that you might want to refer to, but you're probably not going to use it again. So I had for a while wanted to try using an iPad. Colleague Jason Aquila, music director and coach for the Baldwin Wallace Voice Performance Program, was upgrading. He plays most, if not all, of the material from the iPad. He's got this cool pedal that switches the page and turns the pages. And so I asked him about purchasing his. So I did that and got to try it out. Long story short, this production of Don Giovanni was the very first time I tried to use the iPad. Now, I'm a pretty traditionalist type of guy, and I think I resisted for a while, thinking, I want the hard copy, I want the paper, I want to feel it and touch it and be able to turn the pages. And I think a lot of that is still true. So again, like I said, each stage director has their own process. I might use it all the time. I might have some productions where I just really want to have the feel of the page. But let's kind of dig into a little bit. I'll get into some specifics about the program and how that works. Let's just talk about staging or blocking. I made a lot of notes on this page, so let me advance one page. Okay, a little less going on. So again, we have on this side, on the left side of the page, this is our score. On the right side of the page, this is our mini ground plan. And essentially what this allows me to do in my process is I've got a small little picture here that reminds me what does the stage look like from the audience perspective. And then all the details here in this ground plan show me the measurements, the positions on the stage, where can actors enter from. They can enter from here, here, they can come up these stairs here, they could come from up here and up this platform. So it's a visual representation of where the action is happening. Up here, I'm going to turn one more page forward. Here you see this, these page numbers here. That can be really useful because whatever I've detailed here on the ground plan, if I'm working with a lighting designer or different designers, projection designers, I'm able to share this file with them and they could see directly, or if there are a couple of pages that someone needed to reference, or if they don't work digitally and I wanted to print them, then I could highlight the action that's happening here and I could say, okay, this is page 14. And that way, if they don't have the program or they prefer to work in an analog and not a digital medium, they're able to do so. So that's something I think pretty standard, pretty common that a lot of directors will do. So for my process, I sometimes jokingly refer to it as my football plays. So if you look here, you'll see that there are initials for characters, L period underline. That's how I do indicate my characters. So this is for Leporello, character of Leporello. And so at this point in the action, here he is. And then there's a number 1 that shows an arrow that says he's going to cross stage right. And then this number 2, he's going to arc and cross to downstage left. And then at number 3, it's not so much of a crossing action, but it's more of a changing your angle. So he changes from a downstage left angle to or stage left angle to a downstage left angle, just to kind of change around how he is. And if you notice these numbers here, here's the 1, here's the 2, here's the 3. I like to put them into the music. So if you look on this side of the page, here's the 1. So that's where the character would do that action. Here's the 2. That's where the character would do that action. Now, traditionally, if this was written in pencil on a score, if an actor does something in rehearsal that's more interesting or more compelling, or maybe we discover something together, then I would get out the eraser, erase, put it somewhere else. What was interesting about this to me is I could tap here on this and I can move it. I've sort of disabled this so I don't have as much control because I wanted to control it here for the sake of our presentation. But I'm able to just grab that number, move it to somewhere else on the page, make a quick note, or even if I need to delete all these things that I've just done there, I can quickly clean that up so that I've got, again, the clean page that I had before. So I found it to be pretty interesting, pretty facile in terms of the use. And if occasionally you needed to get into a little more detail, you can grab and make things even larger. Or if I needed, let's say in this ground plan, I wanted to really sketch out some things in detail, I could get in there and really get into the details. Now that I'm in here, you can see it gets a little blurry as I zoom in, but this outline is showing a unit of steps. And so you see these little circles, so it says +0, +8, +16, +24, +32. Anytime you have a plus and a circle, it's showing you your elevation from the ground level of the stage. That's useful because in this case, I had never seen the set physically before I was on the ground in Indianapolis. So what this enabled me to do was, with the ground plan, understand how much distance vertically, how much distance left and right or up and down stage actors might be traveling. So that's a little glimpse of that. If you get a little closer up here, you can see here the columns. This gives you some column detail. Up here, this continues to show you where other entrance points were upstage, where the gravestone locations lived. And again, if I keep scrolling up, this gives that detail of what does that picture look like from the front. So that if I zoom out and I take that overview again, then I can say, oh, okay, I'm reminded what does the stage picture look like up here? What does it look like here? Where does number one need to happen on the page, etc. I don't have the number three indicated here because it was one of those things that in rehearsal I wanted to discover, where did the actor feel most comfortable? I knew that we wanted an angle change or a position change, but I wanted to see, where did the actor want to turn? Where did they feel it most? Was there a moment they needed to connect with Maestro in the pit, or something else that they would discover in terms of rehearsal? So that brings me to the next point I wanted to chat about, is that when you're preparing a score, when a director prepares, not only are there different ways to indicate the notes in the score. Again, these are just mine. I like initials underlined. That way I can show which direction the character is. For instance, if Donna Anna were to end here and I wanted her to be angled downstage and left, I can indicate that with that line. If I wanted the same Donna Anna to be angled downstage and right, I indicate it with that line. If I wanted her to be looking upstage, I could indicate that. That's just my system that I worked out. It's quick. I'm able to write it and know what it means, but then I can look at the page and understand where everybody goes. But sometimes you're in a production process where you have very limited time. There's not a lot of time for in-rehearsal discovery, and you really have to have everything mapped out very specifically, almost measure by measure per beat to say, okay, when we're doing staging in our first rehearsal where we have it together, not a music rehearsal, but a staging rehearsal, and we're just trying to get the actors to go where they need to go. That might be because the lighting designer and I have had a conversation with the scenic designer and the projection designer, and we know that we need them to be in this 3-foot vicinity, because if they're too far right, it won't work with the lighting plot that we have. If they're too far left, they'll be in the way of the projection and we'll get a really nasty shadow that we don't want. Or, hey, we do want them to be hit by some of this projection, so be sure that they're in this place. There's a lot of layers of detail that come together. But there are times when the staging plan has to be really, really precise and really thought out, measure to measure, beat to beat. The more choreographed or stylized the production is, the more so it has to be that way. On the other side of the spectrum, if you have the luxury of time and you have several weeks of rehearsal or a chance to explore, or if the whole concept of the production is to create something in more of a devised way, then the plan here might look very, very vague. It could be something. Here you see there are specific times where characters are moving and when they're arcing, and Donna Anna and Don Ottavio in their duet are doing specific things. But if we had time and wanted to play, I might just say, okay, here, number one, something happens here. Let's play around with it and see what's possible. There have been times before where the aim of the production had been to explore what we could do in a physical way. For instance, when we Cleveland Opera Theater co-produced a three-penny opera with Baldwin Wallace Conservatory at the Maltz Performing Arts Center. There were a number of things that came into play with regard to availability of the venue, how long we had to load in. And loading in is literally the first time your team can come into the venue with your materials to start setting up for your performance. We had 3 days from when we could load in to the day of opening, actually including the day of opening. So we got to load in on a Wednesday and open on a Friday. So we knew that we didn't have a lot of time to bring things in, and we also knew that whatever we did in the rehearsal room needed to remain precise. And since we didn't have a lot of time to load in, it was the first time that an opera or theatrical production was being done in the venue. What we did was conceive of a way to do it on scaffolding. That was partially because I happened to be working on a show that involved scaffolding at the time. We knew it was something that could be deliverable. We didn't have to worry about building and transporting it and it not working in the space. So it took one of the hurdles off the table. But what that did for the artists on the preparation side was give them a whole new world to explore. Because typically on this ground plan, we're thinking about upstage and downstage, and stage left and stage right. But now we have this vertical axis. So not only are we worried about downstage, upstage, left and right, but we're also thinking about, oh, how can we traverse up and down? And then when we're up, can we go diagonally and this way and that way? So a lot of that rehearsal process was exploring, what was possible. What kind of configurations could we put the scaffolding in? So that was me and the scaffolding and a thermos of coffee and an all-night session. I tried out all the different ways that the scaffolding could come together, with an eye also on the fact that we knew that the orchestra in the malts would protrude a bit up from where the stage level was. So if we had the stage here, orchestra players would be here. So we wanted the stage action to happen above that. So what we did when we were carefully considering those positions were to say, when the scaffolding moves, we had to have playing levels that allowed the main action to be high if things needed to be on the ground, or if a playing area was more open, we had to make sure that it would accommodate people standing on those areas. So in all of that exploring, because it was a medium that hadn't really been worked on, I didn't have as specific a ground plan as this. Part of that was by design, to see just what was possible, how much of a jungle gym-like atmosphere could we create, how much climbing, how much swinging, how much hanging could happen. And also because later in that season at Baldwin Wallace, we were having a guest director, the fabulous Noah Naamat, who's on staff at the Royal Opera. And I knew that her production was going to be very precise, very choreographed, very, very stylized, and so wanted to give the student artists an experience of working on both sides of the spectrum. So that's a little bit of an overview about either being super specific about this measure, this action must happen, or it could happen in a number of places. Let's feel where it might be. And as I said, each stage director has a different way they come at it. Personally, I like to make sure that in my scenic outline, in a spreadsheet, sometimes I feel like my life exists in spreadsheets, I'll have all of the main action broken down. I've got the main story that I feel like we need to tell, any physical storytelling, the main points, what's the central conflict, so that even if I'm in a place where it's a very specifically mapped out production where this action happens in this measure, we might be in rehearsal and an artist might make a choice that's way more interesting or opens up another possibility. So as long as the director has a really clear sense of, no matter how we lay it out physically on the stage, the most important parts of the storytelling are point A, point B, point C, so on and so forth. So that regardless of how it ends up playing itself out on stage, we're able to deliver it and make it compelling. So that's in our Page to Stage series, and looking at how we bring work literally from the page to the stage. This quite literally takes a look at the page, and then how these, as I said, football type plays, the X's and the O's and the lines and the graphs and the arrows indicate what happens with the action. Now each singing actor will also have their own process for keeping this blocking. They write down their notes and their score in their individual way so that they remember what it should be. And then depending on the production team, the stage manager might be keeping track of these types of things, or the assistant director might be keeping track of these types of things. There are times when I'll lean over and say, here's the plan I have. It might vary drastically. Let's see how it goes. So there are some shows that, some productions where if I feel like there's going to be a good deal of flexibility, in the past when it was paper, I've avoided writing everything down because I thought it's just going to get erased anyway and it'll be a huge process. But in the case where it's all digital and on a PDF and we're not sacrificing trees to make it happen, it's probably going to be something that I come to the table with more when it's a production that has more of that devised aspect. Something else is interesting with this, you can look into bookmarks. So rather than in the typical director's score, I always have a tab. Each act has its own color. Um, and so let's say Act 1 is red, and Act 2 is blue, and Act 3 is green, or whatever it might be. Then within each of those acts' colors, there are smaller tabs that have all the individual scenes. With this program here, I can literally jump to whatever scene we might need, and it can happen fairly quickly. Um, this page where we jumped to here, this just happens to have some other information. If you zoom in here, you can see this red indicates where there was a cut in the score. So if it goes away, then we cut to later. I had a little note here, LX, short for a lighting cue, something electrical or lighting wise needed to happen specially here. So as I was working through, I put it in a different color, to remind myself of things there. So this just gives you a little bit of a glimpse into how a stage director would bring something from page to stage. This one has a lot of things happening, a lot of different cues, furniture moving on, furniture moving off, and again, you can see on this side of the page here where those things happen. Number one, Elvira making her entrance here from stage right, entrance number two coming down there, and so on and so forth, where all of the different actions happen on the page. So that's an example of bringing a score to life from page to stage. And again, you can see that in greater detail here if you needed to zoom in and really see like how things were happening and what was bringing the stories together, et cetera, et cetera. You see here when there's a squiggly line like this is, okay, let's see what the physicality of the actor is like. How much does she, in this case, the great Donata, like how much movement was she going to have, knowing we didn't want her to be absolutely still, but have some kind of a sense of movement. Donata as a former dancer and myself as a former dancer, I think we had an interesting connection there where I think we were frequently on the same page in terms of being engaged in your body and the way you move and just using the musical score. That if you watch it in fast forward, it's almost like a dance. And I think that if I could zoom out in all of these pages, I don't know if I can how to get. I'm sure there's a way, but if I wanted to zoom out, I don't know the technology well enough. I don't want to make a mistake here. But if I zoomed out far enough and we looked at all of the patterns, I think that's where you see my influence as a former dancer. Or if I ever watch a production that I've done in fast forward, there's always sort of a larger sense of motion to say, oh, this had a circular feel, or the idea here was a spiral that started high and it got more concentric and the energy got faster, or this one was very angular in its idea, or this was very boxy or swoopy. And again, that's just because of my experience as a dancer. So I think as a stage director, especially in opera or theater set to music, that's something that plays in heavily in terms of the energy of the movement, the quality of the movement, the style of the movement, and how it's phrased physically matched up with how it's phrased musically, how it's phrased textually. And that to me is what's one of the most exciting things about opera. And you get this confluence of all the art forms, and you take the human instrument to its maximum in terms of how it can communicate and what it can communicate. So thanks everybody for joining me and diving into the rabbit hole of what staging looks like and how that works. Thanks for joining us on Page to Stage. Thanks for joining us every weekday on Opera 101 during the noon hour when we give you a special glimpse inside opera. I know this is Verdi month. This isn't a Verdi production, but this is the only production that I had ever done on this PDF expert or on an iPad, and I figured this would be the easiest way to show what that process looks like through my perspective as a director, and also to show a little bit of the technology and some of the things that are possible in working in this digital age. And what I found, especially in working with folks when we can't be together because of the pandemic, this came in handy a lot because I had just had this experience, and it enabled me. I didn't have to scan every physical page that I was making, but I could literally screen share and talk with the actors via Zoom or via video chat. And then if something came up that was new, I could change it real time. Or if we needed to dig into it more and explain it, I was able to dig into it as well and alter it or move something around, and it just facilitated questions. So it's definitely wasn't a substitute for working in person, but it provided at least a way to do it in some capacity. So again, thank you today for joining. I hope you learned something interesting about staging. If you have any questions about it, please drop it in the comments, and we'll include it in a future session or in other programming that we have. So thanks for joining today. Be sure to join us every day in the noon hour, and hope everybody is staying safe. Hope everybody is staying healthy, and thank you for your support. All right, I'm going to try to stop the share here. I think that works. I think you have just me now. So I'm going to sign off. Thanks, everybody. Have a lovely Wednesday, and we'll talk with you soon.